We were young until we weren't, but the books stay the same. Rereading our favorite books.
This part.
It's off to a good start when we're both sighing.
My mood today is just feelings.
Hello. Welcome to Reread, a very special reread episode. It's our Valentine's Day special because when you think of romance, you think of Morgan and me. And of course, on this episode, we're talking about the most romantic thing ever written, apparently, Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare.
Nothing says romance like Romeo. The worst romantic lead of all time. There, I said it. Take that.
More like Homeo, if you will. And thirsty let. I don't have a clever one for Juliet.
No, Juliet's chill. We like Juliet.
Well, we'll see about that. I have some thoughts about her too.
Why do you sigh, mate? Like, for real.
It's fascinating to think about how this story is held up as the pinnacle of romance. And when you actually read it and digest it a little bit more than we probably did in high school, or at least I did in high school, it's like,
Yeah. Actually, you know what? Speaking of high school, I suppose we should talk about our backgrounds with the book. So you did read it in high school, yes?
Yes.
And
I did.
I was prompting you to tell your story.
I see. I did. Okay, I read it in 9th grade. I don't really recall. I mean, obviously, it's in Shakespearean English, so it is hard to understand. And we're given this idea that Romeo and Juliet is supposed to be romantic. We're told that it's a tragedy, and I suppose in the strictest sense of the word it is. But I have to say, rereading it this time around, this is some funny I know we'll get into this, but I just want to say the very first scene of this play reads like something that you would see in a Mel Brooks film. It's like a couple of dudes fighting, and then suddenly a bunch of people run out and start fighting, and then even more people start fighting, and it's just the most ridiculous, over-the-top thing. And I definitely missed so much of the humor.
Yeah.
So I've really come to appreciate it a lot more for that reason. How about you? What's your story with Romeo and Juliet?
So, funnily enough, also read it in 9th grade. This might be one of the few things that is universal across the state of California.
Apparently.
All 9th graders read Romeo and Juliet. Weirdly enough, for 9th grade English at my school, I don't know if this was the case for everyone, but we read 4 books in the entire year. And there was one quarter was each book.
What?
I know. Ridiculous. So this was 2nd quarter of 9th grade. We'd just done Of Mice and Men. So we went from Steinbeck to Romeo and Juliet. That's where we were at. And the weird thing is, even though we spent an entire quarter on it,
yeah,
I remember almost nothing of what I was taught about it. What I do remember is that we watched both adaptations.
Oh my god, yes.
And there's nothing more awkward, I'm sorry, than watching adaptations of Romeo and Juliet in a room full of 9th graders. And I was at the time deeply uncomfortable with watching people kiss in movies or on stage or really at all. I just kind of found it gross and awkward. And I would occasionally just kind of compulsively giggle because of it, because I was just so embarrassed, secondhand embarrassed for these poor people.
Yeah.
Truly, that was an awkward experience. In one of the adaptations, they show Romeo's butt, and everyone went insane in class.
Oh,
this is what I remember about Romeo and Juliet, you know?
I didn't see this, but I know that some of my fellow peers in school, they watched one version of Romeo and Juliet where you see Juliet's boobs. Oh, everybody's minds was blown by that.
Yeah.
The adaptation that I saw kind of we only watched the first 20 minutes before the substitute teacher turned it off, was the Romeo plus Juliet adaptation.
Yeah, with Leo.
With good old Leo DiCaprio. Yeah, the teacher turned it off around the time when they started showing characters doing hardcore drugs.
Yeah.
So...
But anywho, so, like, most of my initial impression of this was, like, I was had very awkward experiences with it. And also that I hated Romeo with a burning passion. And let me tell you, that's endured to this day. Romeo sucks. He's just a bad love interest. Like, no one tells you when they're, like, romanticizing Romeo and Juliet to you that, like, that boy is... the ficklest little being, so not original. There's no thoughts in that head that are his own. And they do call him out on that in the play multiple times.
Yeah.
But, like, I think Romeo and Juliet, the play, is so much more interesting than the conception of it in our, like, pop culture. Because I don't think the play is trying to tell you that Romeo and Juliet are actually in this, like, incredible love.
Yeah.
Because multiple of the characters are like, no. Honey, no.
Yeah.
Your feelings for her are not real. They are real to me!
What I was reading it as this time around, that I don't necessarily think was Shakespeare's actual intention, but, like, obviously it is a cautionary tale of some kind. But, like, I was specifically reading it as, like, a cautionary tale for, like, young women. Like... Juliet, this is a cautionary tale for Juliet. She should not have gotten involved with Romeo.
I agree with you, it's a cautionary tale, although I don't know if it's necessarily for young women, insofar it's against young love. If you really want to, you could, like, read this as, like, a pro-abstinence kind of play.
But it's also, like, weirdly, like, a cautionary tale of, like, don't try and force your children to marry people they don't want to marry, because there's obviously the whole Paris subplot.
Yeah.
That, you know, we'll discuss. But I think there's a lot of cautionary elements here. I don't think that this play is, like, actually hoisting Romeo and Juliet up as, like, this ultimate couple. I think it's very much like, they're like, no. Shakespeare was like, no.
I would also say that this is a cautionary tale about how you can't trust poor people, but that's a whole nother topic entirely. But yes, yeah. I guess the overall message of Romeo and Juliet is that love is stupid, which is very true.
All right. So, brief summary of Romeo and Juliet. Basically, actually, if you want to hear what happens in the play, just read the prologue. It will tell you everything that's going to happen. But we'll skip the two households both alike in dignity and give an actual summary. But play opens on some minor characters that are Capulets and Montagues having a little fight. Because they hate each other. And we never know or learn why. It's just the Capulets hate the Montagues hate the Capulets. Anytime they're, like, in the same space, they're like, all right, let's get those swords out. Murder time. And then Benvolio comes in and he's like, let's not. And then Tybalt comes in and he's like, let's do. And the fight escalates. Lord Capulet and Lord Montague come on. And as you said, just more and more people joining this fight. Until finally, the prince of the whole city comes in and is like, stop fighting. You guys have been fighting so much. Everyone else is so mad about it. Like, you're disrupting the rest of our lives. What did we do to deserve this? And if you fight again, I'm gonna kill you. Like, I'm gonna have you killed. Because apparently that's the only way to make this stop. And then after that, we get introduced to Romeo, and we're introduced to him as this very mopey sad boy No one knows why, but he's just, wandering in groves, sighing to himself. And, his good friend, Benvolio's like, I will find out what is going on. And it doesn't really take him long. Romeo comes on and is like, ugh, I'm dying. And Benvolio's like, so you're in love. And Romeo's like, I can't tell you my pains. And 2 seconds later, Romeo's like, yes, Rosalind. I love Rosalind so much. And if that's not what you're expecting, we understand. But that is who Romeo's talking about, Rosalind.
I mean, Romeo is vague posting so hard. It takes pages and pages to finally get this woman's name. And there's a great moment. It seems like he's about to say this person's name. And he says, in sadness, cousin, I do love a woman. And it's like, no f***ing what?
Yeah.
It is so funny.
It is very funny. And Benvolio's clearly done with it too.
Yeah.
When Romeo's like, I do love a woman, Benvolio's like, I aimed so near when I supposed you loved. 5 pages later, you're like, yes, I'm in love. Yes, I got that bit. Come on, Romeo. They, to help get Romeo's mind off of everything, decide they're gonna crash this Capulet party that night, which conveniently is a masked thing. And then we switch over to Capulet household where Capulet is talking with this guy named Paris who really wants to marry Juliet. But Capulet's like, she's 13. That's a little young. Maybe no. Let's wait a little while. But why don't you go make her fall in love with you so that when she's old enough, it all goes smoothly. Paris is like, chill. We'll woo her at the masked night. Juliet is informed about this, and she's like, I guess I will look for this guy and see if I'm into him. Lady Capulet's been waxing eloquent about how great this guy is. We'll get into that because I think the ways in which Lady Capulet describes Paris are very interesting. But anyhow, so then at that mask tonight, Romeo rolls up with his buddies, Benvolio and Mercutio, and Mercutio is so done with Romeo's in-love bullshit. Mercutio's like, calm the f*** down.
Uh-huh.
Let's have some fun. Stop being a bore. But yeah, so they crash the party, and then once they're there, Romeo's like, I'm just gonna stand here and not dance. I'm too sad to dance. I am a sad boy. Sad. And then he's like, shh. He sees a girl. He's like, oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. Which, by the way, she's wearing a mask. So, he is literally just her body is that banging.
Yeah, I guess so.
And he approaches her. I should say, while he's monologuing about how hot Juliet is, Tybalt overhears him, and Tybalt somehow recognizes his voice as a Montague. I would like to just pause here to be either there are distinct accents going on, there's a Montague accent and a Capulet accent, which I don't really know how that would happen within the same city, but okay. Or Tybalt has memorized the voice of every Montague.
Or Tybalt specifically has memorized the voice of Romeo. This is not supported by the text at all. This is just
actually
us.
There might actually be some textual evidence that Tybalt is into Romeo. We can get into that later. So Romeo and Juliet have their first little chat, and in 2 seconds, they're making out.
Good for them.
Although, I want to just say, Juliet gets in. I think she's nagging him. It could be a positive. I looked it up, and people are mixed on this. But, he kisses her, and she's like, you kissed by the book. Which either people are interpreting as, you kiss, precisely perfectly, you learned it from a book. Or, you kiss, kind of rotely, you learned it from a book.
Yes.
I'm gonna go with she's nagging him.
I'm gonna go with she's 13, and this is what she understands of love. So from her, it's a compliment, but in reality, it's a backhanded compliment without either of them necessarily realizing that that's the case.
It is great.
Either way, it is great, yeah.
And it's also great because that's the last line she says to him before she has to go off and talk to her mom. This is what she leaves him with. They make out, and she's like, you kiss by the book. Peace out. Love Juliet. Anyhow, then right after that, they both discover who the other person is, because, they didn't ask for names. They were just like, we're in love, let's make out. What are names anyways? And then they find out they're enemies.
Oh, no.
Yep. But, they're still determined to go on with this love. So Romeo abandons his friends to hop into a garden to see Juliet, and then this is where the, very iconic "What light through yonder window breaks."
The balcony scene, yeah.
And then Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
The most misunderstood line in all of English literature.
It's, why are you Romeo?
Yes, she is not asking about the whereabouts of Romeo, but why he is named Romeo.
Which is why it goes on to say, deny thy father and refuse thy name.
Pretty big demands.
Yeah, sure. We'll get into that, because that's the one really academic thing I want to talk about is, identity and names in this. But anyhow, Romeo reveals that he's been spying on her. One could say they have an Edward and Bella moment.
Oh, God.
Anywho, and they both declare their love for each other. Actually, Juliet declares her love, and then is like, okay, you swear your love. And he's like, I swear on the moon. And she's like, no, that the moon changes. That's a stupid thing to swear on.
Yeah.
And then eventually it's like, just don't swear at all. Like, just marry me tomorrow and I'll believe you. It's really great because Juliet is possibly the most sensible person in the play, but is also a 13-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And so, her innate sensibility is weighing against her 13-year-old girlness, and it's really a struggle between them the entire play. And I think you see that in this scene. Because she's, very practical about, he might just be lying to her.
Right.
And he might change his mind, because, men are fickle. But, she's 13 years old, and she's in love, and she wants to get married.
She's literally kissed somebody for the first time, and he's a good-looking guy, and it's like, whoa, I like this feeling. Let's keep this going.
I think it's crucial, to remember their age, that they are teenagers, and that explains a lot. So, Romeo runs off with plans to arrange the marriage. He goes to his buddy, Friar Lawrence, and is like, hey, need you to help me marry this girl, Juliet. And Friar Lawrence is like, you've spent so many days here sobbing about Rosalind. So many days. Seriously, now you're all up on this other girl's business? And he only really agrees to marry them because he's like, this will end the family's feud. But he does say multiple times that Romeo is an idiot. So then Romeo rejoins his friends for some more joking around and sexual wordplay.
Very mature.
He arranges with Juliet's nurse the wedding, and so that's all set up. And he's also like, take these ropes and then hang them from Juliet's balcony so that tonight, after we're married, I can come in and bang her. And she's like, okay, sounds reasonable.
Oh, God.
So Juliet is formed. She goes to Friar Lawrence. They get married. And then right after their marriage, Benvolio and Mercutio, who have no idea any of this is happening, are just hanging around. And then Tybalt shows up and he's like, yeah, I'm looking for Romeo. I want to fight him. And they're like, well, maybe not. Maybe not doing that. But then Romeo shows up and Tybalt's like, cool, here he is. Gonna fight him now. Romeo's like, no, I love you so much, Tybalt. You don't understand why I love you, but I love you so much.
That awkward moment when you realize you've banged your sworn enemy's cousin and you're like, I don't know how exactly to explain that.
He hasn't actually banged her yet. He's only married her, which means...
That's a good point.
He hasn't consummated the marriage. Tybalt might be like, better to kill you before you can bang my cousin. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
And then Mercutio, who's been watching all of this, is like, what are you doing, Romeo? Why are you just taking this? If you're not going to do something about it, I'll do something about it. So he's like, I'll fight you, Tybalt.
Let's
And Romeo is like trying hard not to have them fight because like, one, it's been forbidden, and two, he did just marry Juliet. This is a problem. And so he starts trying to beat down their swords with his own sword, like just knock them out of the way.
Yeah.
And Tybalt is able to, under his arm, stab Mercutio.
Oh my god.
So Mercutio's like, what the f***? You just got me killed, you asshole.
A plague on both your houses or whatever.
Yes. And he says it 3 times, so...
Plague of both your houses, I'm
A
spent.
plague of both your houses! Plague of both your houses! They have made worms meat of me!
No, like, actually, I think that's relevant. He says it 3 times, so you know the plague is gonna take.
Oh, indeed.
It's a curse. Any repetition of something 3 times is normally significant. So, I do think it's actually on purpose that he says it 3 times.
It also comes off as weird to me because Mercutio is the one who started the fight. Okay, I get that you're dying, but you started the fight. You can't really blame these 2 other houses when you're like, all right, I'm going to kill you. Oh, you've killed me. How dare you do that? Like,
I mean, to be fair, so Tybalt kills him, so obviously he blames the Capulets for that. But Tybalt is able to kill him because Romeo gets in the way. So that's a Montague thing. So he's like, because of both of y'all, I've died.
okay.
I think his feeling is that he might not have died if that hadn't been a thing.
I guess for me, it's hard to sympathize with Mercutio because he started a sword fight with somebody. Like,
yeah, but he's also like a teenager dying. I'm not sure
yeah.
how much reason. Like, if I was dying because, like, I don't know, your family was like fighting with someone, and I was trying to defend your honor, and then like through your actions, I also like got killed by your enemy. I'd be pretty goddamn mad.
that's true.
I think part of the whole thing is he's trying to defend Romeo too. He's like, you're my bud, I have your back. And then, like, instead of having his back, Romeo's trying to, like, interfere and beat down the swords, and, like, that's why he gets killed. So he's like, I was just out here being a good bro, trying to help you out against your family's enemies.
Indeed.
And, like, this is how I get repaid? F*** you. I don't know. I'm not a huge Mercutio person. I know some people, like, he's their favorite Romeo and Juliet character. I think it's reasonable that he's pissed.
I'll give him the credit that he is literally dying, so I would be pissed too. But I think if he had had the time to reflect on his actions a bit more, he might have seen that, well, you know, the blame could be spread around a bit more, including himself. Anyway, I don't know why we got stuck on this point.
I don't know either. But then Romeo, who's an asshole, is like, oh my god, Mercutio's dead. Oh, sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate. Which, like, what the f***? Don't go blaming Juliet.
It's always the woman's fault.
Yes. Mercutio's tried to put the blame on him, but Romeo's like, no, this is Juliet's fault. I would have fought, but, like, she was so hot that, like, she made me weak and effeminate. Yeah, that's a thing. So then Romeo kills Tybalt, runs away because they're not allowed to fight, and he just murdered his wife's cousin. And then the prince rolls up and is like, what the hell is going on? Benvolio's like, I'll tell it to you straight. Your kinsman, Mercutio's dead, because Tybalt killed him. And then Romeo killed Tybalt. Mm-hmm. And the prince is like, did I not just tell you yesterday not to and fight people? And he's like, and now someone in my family's dead. My family. But he's like, since Romeo was avenging Mercutio, I'm just going to exile him instead of kill him like I promised. But seriously, stop fighting. Stop. Back at the Capulet residence, Juliet's just waiting alone for nightfall so she can have some of that sweet, sweet marriage bed sex. Then the nurse rolls up. We haven't really talked about the nurse, but the nurse, like, it's really one of those people who, like, if it takes, like, 3 words to say something, she will say 300. So she's like, oh my god, everything's ruined, everything's bad, everything's horrible. And then Julia's like, what's going on? And the nurse is like, dead, he's dead. And Julia's like, oh my god, Romeo's dead? Freaking out. This goes on for a while until the nurse is like, no, Tybalt's dead. Romeo killed him and is now banished. This scene, I think, is one of the most fascinating Juliet scenes and, like, probably the most, like, psychologically interesting part of this play. Juliet truly goes through this thing of, like, oh God, my husband just killed my cousin who I love.
This is awkward.
And so she's really, really, really pissed at Romeo, but then she's like, he's my husband, and I have to, like, essentially be loyal to him, and, like, how can I think these things about my husband? Like, obviously in that time, even now, this lingers, but, like, there's a big idea in, like, raising women that their husband is, like, the most important person. Everything other than that is, like, lesser. But, like, she has a really hard time because she's like, I should forget Tybalt's death. This should be nothing to me, but I can't. It's really interesting. I, like, highly recommend reading just the scene. I think that Juliet, she also says some really interesting things about identity, which, like, hopefully we will talk about.
Yeah.
But anywho, she's, like, very upset and is very worried about Romeo. She's like, oh my God, if he's banished, he's basically dead anyways, because I can't see him.
Yeah.
And she's like, all to my wedding bed and death, not Romeo, take my maiden head. It's very dramatic. It's very, like, 13-year-old extra, like, she's having the time. And the nurse, who before this was absolutely cursing Romeo, because she really liked Tybalt too, is like, I will go find Romeo for you. Like, we'll fix this. It's good. I'll get him. He'll come here. He'll bang you. It'll all be all right.
You gotta fill the void somehow.
Oh, God. Very in keeping with all of the sex puns in this play.
Indeed. It's, well, we'll get to this, but there's a very interesting double entendre at the very end of the play.
Yeah.
We'll get into that.
So, Romeo's hiding at the Friars.
Well, hiding.
I mean, he is. He's been banished.
Well, right,
he's hiding, but also just sobbing on the ground.
Right.
Like, literally, he's on the ground sobbing. He's like, I want to kill myself because I'm banished, and now I can't see Juliet. And the Friar's like, for fuck's sake.
Do you not realize how lucky you are, dude? You killed somebody, and your punishment is that you're gonna be free to live somewhere else.
Yeah, so the nurse shows up, and she's like, hey, where's Romeo? And Friar Lawrence is like, there, on the ground, with his own tears made drunk. Like, he's just savage.
There's a great moment before that where somebody's knocking on the door, and the friar's like, Romeo, hide. For God's sake, go hide. And he's like, unless my tears, like, can create a mist to cover me, I will not do anything. Really half-hearted effort to keep himself alive.
One big collective sigh.
But yeah, so the nurse makes the arrangements that Romeo should still come and bang Juliet. And then Friar Lawrence, we'll get into some of, he has a couple of very long speeches here. Essentially, he's like, okay, so you go have sex with Juliet. Then, before dawn breaks, go to Mantua, hide out, and then we'll figure out something from there. Romeo's like, okay, sounds good. While he's doing that, little does he know, Capulet is making arrangements with Paris to marry Juliet. This was possibly the most confusing part of the play for me, because, like, Capulet had been pretty firm about, like, wanting Juliet to grow up a little bit. He was very worried about her being a wife that young.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, she's, like, so upset over Tybalt, and now he's like, okay, we gotta get her married to Paris, like, ASAP, because she's so upset. And, like, he thinks this will fix it, and he's somehow forgotten all of his issues with her getting married that young anyways. Very unclear. He seems to think he can replace a cousin with a husband.
You gotta fill the void somehow.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so.
This is probably giving the play more credit, but it actually could be politically savvy in this marriage because Paris is related to the prince. We know that Tybalt killed Mercutio, so if any of the punishment is going to come down hard on one of the families, it's going to be the Capulets. And what better way to mitigate that than to have your daughter marry the prince's cousin or whatever, however they're related. But the play does not address that. This is all just sort of...
speculation.
Yeah.
That's going on. They're like, we will get her married to you on Thursday. Juliet's not been told or consulted about any of this. In fact, she's currently in bed with Romeo. They are currently banging.
You can do it all night long!
And there's the whole thing where, like, she doesn't want him to go, but the day's breaking, so he's like, I gotta go, but we'll figure something out, babe. And then her mom comes in to break the, like, exciting news that she's gonna get married to Paris, who she's never met, because they never actually met at the mask thing. So, and there's some, like, Juliet showing off that she's probably the smartest character in the play, because there's some very fun wordplay about how Lady Capulet's like, I know you're really upset because Romeo's not dead. And Juliet says a bunch of stuff that, like, might sort of sound like she agrees, but also has this double meaning that, like, actually, like, she'll never be satisfied until, like, she sees Romeo again. She does make this very funny thing when Lady Capulet finally is like, you're gonna get married to Paris. She says, one sec, let me find the line. I will not marry yet, and when I do, I swear it shall be Romeo, whom you know I hate, rather than Paris. To her mom, it sounds like she's being like, I would rather marry my greatest enemy, Romeo, than marry Paris. But, like, actually she's being like, when I marry, it will be Romeo. Because she's already married.
Indeed.
It's very good wordplay. So she's like, no way in hell. Capulet comes in to, like, find out how pumped she is, and then she's like, no, I'm not pumped. And he's like, you ungrateful you. I mean, literally, he's like,
God.
out, you green sickness carrion.
Yeah.
He's like really going in on her. Out, you baggage, you tallow face, you disobedient wretch. It's rough.
The father figures in this story are interesting, which is, a kind way of putting it, I suppose. But yeah, between this outburst that really came out of nowhere, and then Lord Montague's relative absence, and then the Friar Lawrence himself, he also serves as a father figure for both Romeo and Juliet, and it's really fascinating to contrast them together. But yeah.
Yes. So he's basically like, you will marry Paris or I will kick you out. You can live, like, destitute on the streets. Many people have pointed out this plot hole in Romeo and Juliet, so I will point it out now as well. This should not be a problem for Juliet. She should be like, okay, cool, kick me out. I will go to Mantua and be with my husband. But this doesn't occur to her. Don't know why. But she's like, oh my god, nurse, what do I do? And the nurse is like, well, Romeo's banished, so he probably doesn't dare to come back here to, like, challenge Paris for your hand, so you might as well marry Paris. Like, I think he's better anyways. And Juliet's like, okay. F*** you. Not gonna do that, and I'm no longer gonna tell you my secrets because that was, like, really bad advice. I'm gonna go out to the friar. She goes, the friar is talking to Paris, funnily enough.
What are you eating here?
Juliet and Paris meet for the first time there. There is a lot of parallels between Paris and Romeo that I think are really fascinating, because I think it's kind of meant to imply, honestly, that there's not much difference between them.
Yes.
We'll get into that more. Sorry, I keep wanting to derail to talk about all these cool things, but, like, there's this back and forth between them that I think is it's more antagonistic on Juliet's side, but is reminiscent of the sort of back and forth and wordplay and building off each other's senses that, like, Romeo and Juliet have at their first meeting. And then when he leaves, he says, till then adieu, and keep this holy kiss, which is, like, the whole thing that Romeo and Juliet have in their first meeting is, like, the holy Palmer's kiss. I just think that we're meant to understand that, like, there's not much difference between Paris and Romeo. It's not like Romeo is so much of a better person for Juliet. It's just she met Romeo first. So anyhow, Juliet and the friar come up with this plan where she will drink this potion that will make her seem like she's dead. And he will tell Romeo and then get her from the tomb that she's been buried in when it's safe. Send her to Romeo. They'll live happily ever after. So she's like, cool. He's like, cool, as long as your womanish fear doesn't stop you. He's so sexist. There's so much sexist shit the friar says. It's where Romeo gets it from, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm. Juliet's like, tell me not of fear, you bitch. Not the last part.
But basically, yeah. I think you're also a bit underselling Juliet's dramatic response in this scene because apparently I think she has a knife.
Yeah,
and she's
she
like,
does have a knife.
if you don't tell me a solution, I'm gonna literally kill myself right here. And the friar's like, I've come up with a solution. And then she goes through this long, dramatic list of like, oh, are you gonna tell me to like kill myself? And the friar's like, no, you idiot.
But I think it does, yes, she has this whole speech where she's like, bid me leap rather than marry Paris, or walk in thievish ways, or hide me nightly in a charnel house. Like, it's a whole bunch of stuff. And then he's like, okay, I got a plan. You just have to, like, it's gonna fake die. I think that makes his whole comment about, like, if womanish fear, like, doesn't stop you. Like, that much worse, because Juliet's already been like, I will do all this insane. I am prepared and ready. I have this knife and I will do it. It's just insulting.
Yeah.
So anyhow, she takes the thing. That night she's like, actually, I'm okay with marrying Paris now. It's all good. I'm just going to spend the night by myself, preparing for getting married. Everyone's like, excellent. Excellent. Sounds good. So excited to see you married, Juliet. She does freak out a little bit about taking the potion, more because she's not worried about actually taking the potion itself. Like, she is a little bit, but she's more worried about, like, waking up in the tomb and no one being there and being stuck with the dead bodies. But she eventually drinks the potion, and the next morning they find her supposedly dead body, and they're like, so sad, let's bury her now. Over in Mantua, Romeo hasn't heard anything about any of this until his servant, Balthazar, rides up and is like, hey, Juliet's dead. And he's like, all right, time to go see Juliet and kill myself. So he gets poison from an apothecary, in which Romeo's basically like, money is worse poison to men's souls than the actual poison you're selling. So Romeo is anti-capitalist.
It's only rich people who complain about how money is not that big of a deal.
No, I mean, he's not saying it's not a big deal. He's saying he's literally selling the apothecary poison, but the gold he's giving him is poison. We have no idea why Romeo thinks this. There's been no other indication that there's anything wrong with money in this play.
Yes.
But he's just like, offhand, just gonna let you know I'm anti-capitalist. Peace out. It
really does read like a 16-year-old who's kind of trying to be politically woke.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like the hypocrisy of Romeo coming from, I'm guessing, a wealthy family that has allowed him to go on this grand adventure of hooking up with some 13-year-old and running around with very little consequence. And the reason why is because he's rich. And he could, whatever.
I think this part is funny to me specifically because, like, it is so apropos of nothing.
Yeah.
Like, there's literally no reason for these words to be happening. It has nothing to do with the plot. It has nothing to do with the characterization we've seen previously. It has no reason. But I'm like, is this Shakespeare just, like, self-inserting for a moment to be like, money sucks? Anywho, so after this scene, we find out that apparently, essentially the friar that Friar Lawrence sent to, like, give the letter to Romeo had to quarantine. He had to quarantine, so he wasn't able to send the letter. Now, this is a little weird, because he only would have been quarantining for, like, less than a day, maybe.
And also, there's no mention of a plague or sickness going around. Shakespeare's just like, how do I stop this guy from getting to Romeo? Okay, I'm just gonna say, like, they were scared he was gonna spread the disease. Which, fair. Maybe he forgot his mask back home. Bad move, buddy.
But also a bad move that he only quarantined for a day after being exposed to this pestilence.
Well, yeah.
Much longer quarantine is needed, Friar John. You know what? What happens after Romeo and Juliet die is that Friar Lawrence has been exposed to this pestilence, gives it to everyone at the graveyard scene, the prince, all the Montagues and Capulets, and they all die. And that's, you know what, this is foreshadowed, because Mercutio says, a plague on both your houses.
Oh my god!
It's real!
You're right. And also,
I cracked it.
We also should note that, I mean, this is skipping ahead, but we learned that Montague's wife suddenly passed away during the night, and they think it's because of sorrow, but that's bullshit. We all know that's bullshit. It's the fucking plague.
Oh my god. Wow. Wow.
Big wow.
There's been this secret hidden in Romeo and Juliet for all these years about what happens like after the story, and we really figured it out. We cracked that code.
This is completely unrelated, but months ago, my apartment, we watched Space Jam, and there's a scene where the NBA cancels its season because they think there's a plague going around.
Know what happened to Barkley and Ewing? There's got to be germs in there or something.
Yeah, that's right. That was in New York, 3,000 miles away.
Bacteria like that can travel faster than the speed of light.
Oh my god.
This is too real.
Oh.
Anyway, plague aside.
Yeah. So the point is, the plague has stopped the message from getting to Romeo. Romeo has no clue. Now the friar knows he has no clue, so he's like, oh, better get to Juliet fast. Paris is out here strewing some flowers over Juliet's tomb.
Yeah, just creeping around his tomb at night.
He's like, nightly, I will come strew flowers on your grave and weep. He met her once, but okay.
Yeah.
So Romeo comes, and pretty sensibly, Paris is like, oh my god, he's already killed Tybalt, and now he's come back to with their bodies.
Yeah.
I'm not letting that happen. And Romeo's like, please don't try and fight me right now. I'm in a really bad place. I really don't want to murder you, but I will if I have to.
He's vague posting so hard right now.
Yes. He does that same, like, I love thee better than myself thing.
I know.
Which, like, Romeo.
Romeo.
But Paris is like, no, you're a criminal, and I'm not gonna let you just go into the tomb. So Romeo's like, wilt thou provoke me? Then have at thee, boy.
What the is that? Wilt thou provoke? Come, look at the scene, Romeo. Take a step back. Oh my god.
Yeah. Then he kills Paris, and Paris is like, please lay me with Juliet. And Romeo's like, okay, will do. So he drags Paris's body into the tomb with him. Sees Juliet there. Is like, wow, how is she still hot? She's dead, but she's still hot. So weird how she's dead, but still hot.
It must be because death really just wants to bang her or something.
Yes. Which, like, we should talk about all the times which it's talked about how Juliet's married to death. That happens at least 3 or 4 times in this play.
Mm-hmm.
It's not foreshadowing or anything. But so he kisses her dead body.
Wait, what?
Or, not actually dead, but he thinks she's dead. And then he's like, poison time. Thus with a kiss I die.
So dramatic.
Yeah. The friar shows up. He's like, Juliet wakes up and he's like, okay, Juliet, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but Romeo's dead body's right there.
Wait, what?
And we need to get going.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick you into a nunnery, which obviously was
Yes.
his plan the entire time.
To get thee to a nunnery? Yeah.
Indeed.
But yeah, so she is like, I'm not doing that. I'm staying right here. She sees that he's killed himself with poison. She's like, you asshole, to drink all the poison and not leave enough for me. She hears people coming. She's like, all right, cool. There's a dagger.
Romeo's dagger.
This here, like, I'm sure she gestures at her chest. This is thy sheath. There rest and let me die. Kills herself. Also, this was also foreshadowed because Romeo had previously threatened to the friar to drink poison and kill himself. And then Juliet, as you mentioned, had previously threatened to the friar to murder herself with a knife. There's so much foreshadowing about what exactly is going to happen in the end. Plus also the, like, beginning chorus directly telling you what's going to happen in the end. That, like, this entire play is, like, spoilers for itself.
Yeah.
So everyone and their mother shows up to this tomb to see these dead bodies. And luckily the friar's conveniently there to explain what exactly happened.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe him and don't accuse him of murdering anyone. Which is, like, nice that they just take his word for it. Really, he could have done anything. You don't know.
Indeed. Well, we could talk about the friar's culpability in all of this, because he might not have literally directly killed them, but he definitely did enable some bad behavior.
Yes. I mean, he was the adult in this situation, and he should have, like, been better about being the adult. The nurse is also the adult, but the nurse is also an idiot.
Yes.
So, But the friar should have been like, okay, you'll get married, and then we will go sit your parents down together and tell them. Instead of like, he's like, I'm going to marry you to solve this problem between your family. And then he's like, okay, just keep creeping around, I guess.
Yeah.
What was that? He should have married them and then directly been like, okay, you go into this room and have sex so it's consummated so that your parents can't make you annul the marriage. And then after you've done that, and I've witnessed it, we're going to go sit them all down together and be like, okay, here's the situation. That's what should have happened in this play. But no.
My brain is addled right now, but it sounded like you just said that the friar in this hypothetical would watch Romeo and Juliet have sex to ensure the marriage happened.
I just like to watch you guys.
No. What would happen is they would go into another room to have sex, but then after they've reclothed, normally there's some desire to see evidence, especially, this is probably something that mostly happened with royalty, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happened with nobility either, especially in a case where it's important like this to witness. So he would probably want to look at the sheets afterwards to see, if there's blood from, Virgin Juliet. Obviously, we know in today's world, women don't need to bleed losing their virginity, but, they very much thought that was a thing that had to happen back then if someone was a virgin.
All he really had to do was step in and just smell the extreme teenage horniness, and he would have known. But anyway.
The prince is like, well, this sucks. One, another one of my family members has been murdered. And two, do you see the destructiveness that your stupid fighting has brought? And finally, Capulet and Montague are like, we'll forget whatever weird thing it was we were fighting about. Montague's like, I will build a statue of gold that's Juliet. And Capulet's like, that's nice.
That makes up for it.
Yeah. And yeah, so that's how the play ends.
Man, everyone in this play is so stupid.
Yeah, a lot of Shakespeare's plays are just if you try and actually be reasonable about the plot, they don't make sense or hold together.
Yeah.
That was not the purpose. I think very much the same as if you try and nitpick a fairy tale for coherent plot, you can't. That's not the point. Suspension of disbelief. But that said, even within the bounds of Shakespeare's plots not making 100% sense, the people in this play are really stupid.
A lot of people have to make the type of decisions that are the dumbest possible decisions in that moment to allow the play to actually happen. I'm glad you brought up the idea of fairy tales because there is a very fairy tale aspect to this. I mean, they, fall in love at first sight. There's poisons that mimic death involved, which feels very fairy tale. But it also is trying to ground itself in some kind of realism, and those two things don't quite jive with each other.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, building off of the fairy tale point, this is one of the very few Shakespeare plays that has that sort of chorus prologue that lays out exactly what happens. And there's a lot in this play of characters having forebodings or having dreams of exactly what's going to happen next. And there's a lot of talk about, Romeo and Juliet to some extent being bound to their roles. And so there is this kind of this is fate, and they can't actually make other choices. This all actually has to happen that way, which certainly is set up by the fact that the prologue tells us absolutely everything. So I think that, there is this fairy tale, more fairy tale than usual with Shakespeare aspect of they are in this story and must play these parts. So I think that there's something interesting about that. The just sort of emphasis on dreams throughout all of it, both dreams not being real, but also the dreams coming true. The way those two different ideas, which are both introduced, they just rub against each other in this very weird way where it doesn't entirely, at least on first reading, work.
There's a lot of weird rubbing in this play, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that so Mercutio has the very, explicit talking about dreams. And he says, "True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain begot of nothing but vain fantasy, which is as thin of substance as the air, and more inconstant than the wind, who woos even now the frozen bosom of the north, and being angered puffs away from thence, turning his side to the dew-dropping south." So, obviously this follows his whole Mab speech, and it's, him just being yeah, it means nothing. But it's also, it's weird how this dreams thing is also, very much directly talking about Romeo. And his whole idea of Rosalind seems to be, yes, this idle fantasy, which has no substance and is, more inconstant than the wind. Yes, it's attempting to woo this. We're given Rosalind as this very frozen figure. Someone makes a comment at some point, I want to say it's the friar, that, Rosalind hasn't been receptive to Romeo's advances because she knows that he doesn't actually mean them, and that he's just gonna, drop her in 2 seconds. So there's this weird way that, Romeo's love and affection itself is presented as this dream. If that's the case with Rosalind, then makes you question, what are we supposed to understand about his feelings for Juliet? Isn't it just more of that same dream?
That actually gets at my frustration with what it seems a lot of the scholarship around this play has been, where there's this built-in assumption that Romeo's love for Juliet is true, whereas with Rosalind, it was false. Granted, this is literally a late 16th century text. Ideas of love were different, especially how they played out, I guess, in our cases, on the written page. I think there was a more willingness to just suspend your disbelief around how love actually works, and just, hey, this is a fun little escapism where two cuties love each other, bang, and that's fun to watch.
I just like to watch you guys.
It's hard for me to look at Romeo and be like, oh yeah, his love for Juliet is totally real. That the famous balcony scene where at one point Juliet says, basically talking about why is Romeo named Romeo, really Montague, and she says, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. The thing is, Romeo at the start of the play is, quote, in love with Rosalind, which at the time it was believed that was derived from Rosalinda, from the Latin, which means lovely rose. So is Juliet just not a Rosalind, so to speak, by any other name? And I think there's all these clues peppered in throughout. Probably the biggest clue being literally they talked for 2 seconds and started making out. And then suddenly they're like, we must get married. We should be a little suspect about the foundations of this love. And I think you brought up a good point in the summary about how Paris and Romeo are similar in a lot of ways. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I want to talk about so many things right now, but yes, I will briefly hop into that because I think that there's... Actually, no, pause on the rose thing first, because there's also a lot of mention of rosemary.
Yes.
As, this symbol of Romeo and Juliet, and I did look this up. Rosemary is the symbol of, token of remembrance between lovers and for the dead. And obviously rosemary, Rosalind, that's another sort of rose connection that's drawn, and so it's it's meant to symbolize lovers remembering each other, and yet, I think that when we see Rosemary, we might be reminded that Rosalind has been forgotten, and obviously it also symbolizes the fact that Romeo and Juliet are going to die. But that everything symbolizes that, so it's just hard to get away from it. But yes, so there is the scene, Lady Capulet is trying to kind of prep Juliet to meet this hottie Paris, and she describes him very interestingly. So she describes him as a man of wax. He's the nurse describes him as a man of wax, which I thought was really fascinating. I read a whole article about the use of wax in this period on the stage, and I'm not going to get into that at all, but I was just that's interesting, so I remembered it. And then Lady Capulet goes on to talk about Paris like he's a book. So she says, read over the volume of young Paris's face, and find delight writ there with beauty's pen. Find written in the margins of his eyes this precious book of love, this unbound lover. And at first I was like, oh, that's interesting. Romeo had just, or is about to, like 2 seconds later, describe himself as so bound he cannot pitch above a dull woe. So I was like, oh, interesting. So Paris is described as unbounded, Romeo's bound. But then, as the play went on, I saw more and more the similarities. So obviously, Romeo is very much described in terms of bookishness. You know, he kisses by the book. The friar talks about him wooing Rosalind by the book, and that he like learns these sort of rote things from Petrarch, who Mercutio also talks about. And okay, side note on Petrarch for those who don't know. Petrarch was this guy who wrote a ton of love sonnets. Like he basically like invented the genre, and he wrote them all to this lady named Laura, to whom he like never spoke. So he set up this entire like tradition of love poetry. And so at one point, Mercutio, like, literally makes a comment. Now, he is for the numbers that Petrarch flowed in. Laura to his lady was a kitchen wrench, so he still thinks that Romeo is really into Rosalind. So he's saying that to Romeo, Laura, in comparison to Rosalind, is nothing but a kitchen wrench. But he says, Mary, she had a better love to be-rhyme her. Petrarch is a better lover than Romeo because it's very much insinuated, like, by various people, Romeo just kind of recycles the same old things, whereas Petrarch was an innovator. But Romeo's recycling from books. The amount of times Romeo is compared to a book is ridiculous. So I was like, oh, interesting. So Paris is introduced to us as a book, but then Romeo is also constantly compared being by the book. And then this so weird, the only other time I believe that wax is mentioned, Friar Lawrence, when he's like getting pissed about Romeo being an idiot about wanting to kill himself because he's been banished. He's like, this doesn't suit your shape, like you're born to be better than this. And then he says, thy noble shape is but a form of wax, digressing from the valor of a man. Basically, Paris is described in two ways when we're like introduced to the idea of him as a wax man and as a book. And those are the two things that are also aligned with Romeo over the course of the play. So, and then there's obviously, as we already mentioned, the first meeting of Paris and Juliet has this very similar back and forth where, like, they're doing this wordplay of building off an idea, like, which is very much the first scene of Romeo and Juliet talking, where he's like, you're a saint, and I'm here to, like, worship at your body. And she's like, okay, I'm butchering it, but
you're not as suave as Romeo.
The point is that like part of the reason that I think scholars will argue that like Romeo becomes into Juliet is that she's able to have this sort of witty repartee back and forth with him. But she has it to a lesser degree with Paris. Like obviously their conversation, one, she's not into it, and two, like it's just not as interesting a conversation. But it does have the same back and forth of them building off each other's ideas. And then he ends with that whole idea of the holy kiss, which is something that ties back to Romeo too. And then in the scene with Romeo and Paris where they're actually fighting, one, we see that Paris too is an overdramatic bitch. Two, like Romeo keeps talking about him as a youth, a boy. Like the idea, I don't know how old Paris is supposed to be. I think that we assume naturally that he's older. But if Romeo is calling him young, and we very much see Romeo as a youngin',
yeah,
Paris must be pretty young too. They're very much doubles for each other. And, you know, there's a chance when Juliet first meets Romeo, she has no idea who he is. And I think that You Kiss by the Book could also be like Juliet recalling that conversation with her mom and wondering if this is Paris. And I'm not sure it would be all that different if it was Paris.
Right.
And I think we're supposed to understand that.
Yeah, I think I feel like there was potential there to play up the Paris connection where Juliet thought that was Paris and really play with that. But to flip it around to Juliet's side, there's a fascinating little detail that I also wish was played up more, because apparently Rosalind is also a Capulet. She's the niece of Lord Capulet. And obviously, Juliet is the daughter of Lord Capulet. So there's really seems to be this idea of Romeo really doing his darndest to court disaster, which I want to get to in a second. But I also want to mention very briefly another point about how this relationship really feels more convenient might not be the right word because there's really nothing convenient about this.
No.
But there is a convenience in the sense that at one point, Romeo and the friar are talking, and Romeo reveals that he's in love with Juliet now. And Romeo explains that what it came down to is that Juliet put out and Rosalind didn't.
Yeah.
There's the convenience in that of like, well, she's there, she's willing, but it's also fascinating because I also think that part of what undercuts this love between the two characters is that we see a lot of the idea or the theme of taboo being played across this. And I'm using the term taboo very loosely, not necessarily just sexual taboo, but just
societal taboo.
Yeah. So like there's the obvious taboo that they are members of opposing families. There is, and this is more historical, but there's also the taboo that they just steamrolled through the whole idea of courtship. There's a very interesting moment in the balcony scene where Juliet, in a very traditional way, is like out on the balcony monologuing about how she's in love with Romeo. But what's different is that Romeo is actually there listening in and interjects. And Juliet acknowledges that, oh, you were not supposed to hear any of that. But I guess since you've heard it all, let's just declare that we're in love with each other and skip the formalities. So there's that idea of like, they're doing something bad here.
I'd never felt so naughty.
You know, the friar basically saying, Romeo, you shouldn't do this, is a very good way of ensuring Romeo does it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it feels like, to what degree is this being driven? Obviously, it's not being driven by their personalities. They don't know each other. There's a fascinating line from the friar who, in the context that he's announcing this is after the Capulets have discovered Juliet supposedly dead in her bedroom. And they're all like sobbing and crying and shouting, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead, over and over and over.
She's dead, Jim.
Which made me laugh because it's like, shouldn't any of you be curious about like how the hell she died suddenly in the course of one night? Like that seems odd.
I mean, people just died.
But there's like no investigation or any like, how did this happen? It's just like, well, death must have banged her in the middle of the night, so she's dead now. You know, so they're all sobbing legitimately because it's like the Capulet's only child who's died and Paris's future wife who's died. And the friar comes in and is basically like, stop your crying. She's in a better place now. Also, it's better for like marriages to die young than to live long. Either you die in love or you live long enough to see yourself live through the ending of The Graduate, of suddenly realizing, oh no, I actually have to spend my entire life with this person now. Oops-a-daisies. I'm with you. It is very clear that we are not supposed to look at this relationship and be like, ah yes, this is what I want. Outside of like the very escapist notion of like, sure, it would be fun to just have a meet cute with some hottie and be like, yeah, that was fun. But in terms of actual love, companion love, long-term love, this should not be a model. Which actually makes me laugh to think that like we read this in 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what lessons are we, stupid 9th graders who really don't know anything about romance, supposed to take away from this? Like, we're gonna be taking all the bad lessons from this play.
Speaking of lessons, we talked a little bit about like the cautionary tale aspect of this, and I think with each character we're given like a character flaw, an Achilles heel that is like why this happens. And so like for Romeo, I guess the lesson is maybe don't like over idolize Petrarch.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe leave the love poetry alone. You don't need to go fancying yourself in love with like every other girl you meet.
I do like the ladies, you know. I do like them. I like them and they like me back.
That's a bad thing. To like put it up on this pedestal to the point where you do these absolutely ridiculous things. And of course, Juliet's very sexist character flaw is that she's easy. And this is, of course, foreshadowed with, like, the nurse tells this story about how she, like...
When she comes of age, she'll fall on her back or something, which is very explicit innuendo that she's just gonna bed the first guy who comes along.
Right. So basically when she was a kid, the nurse's husband saw her fall on her front and then was like, I bet when you're older, you're gonna fall on your back. And then little Juliet was like, it foreshadows that she's going to be very easy. And so I think there's something that is interesting about the fact that Juliet is very much connected with light. So one of the first things we're told that Romeo says about her is that, like, she is brighter than the torches. And then, of course, what light through yonder window breaks?
It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief that thou her maid art far more fair than she.
But the other side of light, which Juliet actually brings up in this scene, is that a light woman can be, like, easy, essentially. Like, that's a thing. So, for instance, when she's talking about, like, in truth, fair Montague, I am too fond, and therefore thou mayest think my behavior light. And this is her flaw, and as a woman, she should not be so easy.
Yeah.
She's very true. That's the thing, is that, like, unlike Romeo, she's not fickle. She's very faithful. But the problem is that she was too easy to get in bed. She should have been like Rosalind and been like,
no. Yeah. Like, let's take a second to think about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
no, she was like, I'm down.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
But it's interesting because as you point out, Juliet seems sensible about that. Mm-hmm. When they're making their initial vows, it's actually really funny because Romeo first pledges his love to the moon or whatever.
Right.
But Juliet says, if you vow on anything, vow on yourself or whatever. And Romeo is about to speak again, and Juliet interrupts him again to be like, actually, wait, let's hold off for a second here, which comes off as very funny because Romeo's just trying to do his darndest to, like, play the love sonnet master.
Yeah.
And he just never gets his chance. And there's also, like, a cute element where it does kind of feel like they're kind of, like, participating in this old-timey version of, you hang up. No, you hang up.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's dumb, but it's also kind of cute.
Yeah.
On that note, I do want to sort of give a half-hearted defense for Romeo, assuming he's like 16. At that age, I know, personally speaking, anytime I saw a cutie, I was like, ooh, I like her, you know? And I also participated in writing very bad poetry, I guess. In 6th grade, I made a proposition, I guess, to my crush at the time. I remember I wrote this terrible, terrible letter. Just the most trite And it's like, I can relate, but cool your jets. You're going to get there one day. You know what's funny is I actually wrote like a scene in Shakespearean style based on that experience from 6th grade.
Oh.
I don't know. There's this quality of young love where when you first fall in love or think you've fallen in love, it feels like the most magnificent thing in the world and all your attention is devoted to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like something nobody in the history of the universe has ever experienced before. And that's the kind of tragic bit, is that if somebody told Romeo and Juliet to calm themselves down, they would have grown out of this, continued living, and probably gone on to marry somebody else that would have loved them, and everything would have ended happily ever after. But there is that quality of that, like, when you're in that moment, nothing feels more real and true than that feeling that is just telling you to go make out with that person right now because you are in love, buddy. That said, I mean, yeah, Romeo is an ass. Like, he's inconsistent. He's immature as f***.
Yeah.
Either he's doing bad love poetry or he's participating in these extended, ribald, joking conversations with Mercutio. or he's vague posting about how he feels so sad.
I actually think the most interesting times with Romeo are when he's just having, like, that joking conversation he has with Mercutio that's very, like, sexually charged and ridiculous is probably, like, the best Romeo we get. It's, like, when he's at his most original, because I think that if Juliet's light and the sun, Romeo is night and the moon, in, like, his inconstancy, and also in that, like, there's this idea of, like, sublunary love versus superlunary love, whereas, like, if it's sublunary, it's earthly, it's human. A superlunary love is, like, heavenly, it transcends us mortal whatever.
I am a god, you dull creature.
Romeo thinks this is a sublunary love, or a superlunary love, it's a sublunary love. So he keeps borrowing these ideas of it being, like, superlunary from poetry, as we've discussed. And then we also see him borrow other people's words. Like, in this same scene, the balcony scene, he talks about love's light wings, which is something that, like, Mercutio had brought up a couple scenes ago.
Right.
We see him mirror not only these poets, but also actual people in the play. He will reiterate their ideas in a way that, like, pretty much no one else does. But that scene with Mercutio where they're just joking around and he's keeping up and being very original and, like, yes, very, like, dirty. This is dirty talk.
You talk dirty to me.
But it is probably the most, like, original and interesting we see Romeo be over the course of the play. Otherwise, he's stealing other people's words and ideas. He's vague posting. He's just not being that interesting. There is something about, like, this play that we were joking about it earlier, but, like, there is, like, a lot of homoeroticism, like, lurking under the, like, very overt heterosexuality of this play. Mercutio, for sure, is, like, no one thinks Mercutio is straight. Like, can I just put that out there? Like, I don't think anyone in today's world reads this and is like, Mercutio's straight. And then we talk sort of about the Tybalt shit.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that, like, Romeo, when he's with women, has to put on this idea of the Petrarchan lover. But, like, I, again, think the most Romeo version of Romeo we get is when he's with his just, like, buds, being bros. Not trying to, like, be, you know, love gods.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that gets at this element where, you know, you look at this balcony scene, it puts me in mind of that Flight of the Conchord song. Like, Brett basically has a crush on this woman, so he goes about writing this 300-page long love poem about how he would climb the highest mountain for her, and he would slay 1,000 beasts and blah, blah, blah. And then Jermaine jumps in. It's like, would you actually do any of these things for her? And Brett's like, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. No, I wouldn't. And so then they write a different version of a love poem.
And if you want me to, I will take off all my clothes for you. I'll take off all my clothes for you, if that's what you're into.
How about him in the nude, if that's what you're into? In the nude in front of you, is that what you'd want to view?
Yeah, so you get this, like, over-exaggerated language that Romeo uses when he's talking about Juliet or talking to Juliet. He says, you know, Juliet's basically like, if only you just dropped your name, Romeo, then I would love you forever. And he says, I take thee at thy word. Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth, I will never be Romeo. And it's these kind of exaggerated boasts that I feel in part lead to the tragedy of the end, where they basically talk themselves into a corner where it's like, I love this person. I do, and I keep saying it over and over and over, so I must love this person, and I can't possibly go back on my word because I love this person, and I love her.
I've encountered some kind of cave demon.
You brought up earlier about how this weird dynamic with fate in the play, where it seems like it's saying that fate and destiny exists, but then you have characters directly contradicting that. In some ways, a lot of this is self-fulfilling prophecy of these characters saying, I will kill myself if this happens, or I will never love again. If you keep saying that, you're going to be placed into a position where you will actually do that. I guess the frustrating bit for me is that nobody... I mean, the friar kind of calls that out, but he doesn't really push it that hard. And I feel like there could have been something really, really interesting there if you had that moment where Romeo actually has to reckon with what he said and vowed to do, and what it actually means over the long term. Even if he came at the end to the same conclusion that he loved he loved Juliet, he does kind of love Romeo.
He does love Romeo a lot.
Even if he came to that same conclusion, it would have been interesting to see him actually have to work his way through what he's saying. We get more of that with Juliet, where she actually has to justify loving Romeo, especially after Romeo's just murdered her cousin.
Well, Juliet's just much more internal than Romeo is. Like, she has a much richer internal world. So going back to that moment where she's like, deny thy father and refuse thy name, etc. And then he, doesn't get it and is like, call me but love and I'll be new baptized. But she's actually thinking out, a really interesting concept. Obviously, a lot of people talk about the Renaissance as this, when the idea of the self sort of happens, and the idea of having a self-identity and this sort of internal space. And there's, so much you can read, Stephen Greenblatt's Self-Fashioning. I forget the full title. I just call it Self-Fashioning. I'm sorry, Stephen Greenblatt.
Don't worry, Morgan. I've got you. The full title of the article is The Concept of Self-Fashioning by Stephen Greenblatt. Okay, we can move on.
A lot of identity in the period would have been your family and your family name. So Juliet trying to puzzle this out, what's in a name? She's actually really grappling with this idea of, what is identity? What does it mean? Can you separate out who your family is from who you are? And she later on, in that scene, when she's trying to find out whether or not Romeo's actually died. So she's like, hath Romeo slain himself? Say thou but I, as in A-Y, yes, and that bare vowel I shall poison more than the death-darting eye of the cockatrice. I am not I, if there be such an I. The whole idea of, I am not myself. There is no I, if, Romeo is dead. Again, she's so fascinated by the idea of identity and what constitutes a person, what it means to be herself. And so, I think that whole debate about, Romeo versus Tybalt and, her affections and, she's trying to understand, so she's Juliet wife and she has these responsibilities, but she's also Juliet cousin and has these others and what comes first. And, she thinks so many interesting things. And she has, this internal space to do that. I don't think Romeo has that. I think that he's, ultimately, he wants to come across as thoughtful. He reads poetry a lot, clearly. But,
yes.
He's ultimately very brash and doesn't think things through. When Juliet comes to the friar for help, she has a whole list of things that she is willing to do that she's thought out as possibilities, and they're ridiculous possibilities, but they are things she's thought out. She will do this rather than marry Paris. And she's willing and prepared. She's come help me make a plan. When Romeo comes to the friar, he's I want to kill myself now. It's all ended. It's all over. There's nothing to do. He doesn't have that same internal energy driving him forward. I don't think he's even the one who comes up with the idea of them being married. I think it's Juliet who's marry me. He just wants to say love words at her. And then is pumped when she's cool, let's get married. He's okay.
Nice.
Yeah. He's just not, he doesn't even when Juliet dies, he could have been weird that Juliet is dead. That seems, you said, weird. He could have gone to the friar and been hey, what happened? What if someone killed Juliet? He could have needed to avenge her.
Avenge me! No!
But he doesn't think about that. He's just Juliet is dead. back to the kill myself and be a dramatic little plan. There's not that, like, you know what I mean? I think Juliet's a much more internally interesting character, whereas Romeo is just really, like, he wants to be internally interesting. He thinks he is, but ultimately there's just not that much there.
He's a puddle to Juliet's ocean.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because there is a line where Juliet compares her love for Romeo to an ocean, which is a very nice image, also ridiculous because, again, they have literally just met. That aside, you know, if Juliet was around today, I think she would identify as a goth. First of all, there's all this talk of her being married to death. What is more goth than that? And then there's this great line, probably one of my favorite lines from this play, where Juliet is just talking to herself as all Shakespeare characters do, and she says, "Give me my Romeo, and when he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars." And I... that whole image, I thought about, you know, those like glow-in-the-dark stars that you hang from your ceiling?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I imagined. Juliet just, after Romeo's died, just hanging him very serial killer-like, which I think speaks more so to the capacity of her imagination.
Yes.
Not many lovers would think about cutting up their lover, presumably dead lover, into little stars. I think that's pretty unique to Juliet. Worrisome, but unique.
Yeah, no, Romeo's like, you're like the sun, because you're so bright and hot. And she's like, I want you to be cut up into little stars and hung in the heavens.
See, that's why you want to get to know a person first before you really commit to them. Romeo was going to have a bad end one way or the other. Let's just put it that way. It's funny that you talk about that scene or you talked about your reaction to the scene that Juliet is grappling with Romeo killing Tybalt, because it actually made me laugh, because the way it's framed, she starts out by saying how much of a serpent and cruel and evil Romeo actually is, and then the nurse chimes in to basically confirm everything that Juliet is saying, and then Juliet turns around in a full whiplash 180, is like, how dare you insult my husband?
Mm-hmm.
He is incapable of being ashamed. And then it goes into her grappling, like, what does it mean? And there is some overdramatic elements where she's like,
yes,
I would rather my entire family die rather than Romeo be banished. And it's like, whoa there, lady. Let's take a chill pill and think about what you're saying. Not to dismiss 13-year-olds in the world, because 13-year-olds are complex and nuanced people who are deserving of being recognized for their equally complex and nuanced emotions. But she is 13 years old.
There's just a certain level of drama that I think comes with that. But I think it's interesting because, and now it's been so long since I read Hamlet that this might be just my own reading of Ophelia maybe getting in the way. But I think that there's this interesting, I think why I especially liked this, even though, yes, it is like mildly ridiculous because she full on curses Romeo out. Yeah. And then it's like, why did I do that? I'm such a bad wife. But there's this, I think, common thread between the two of them, and it might be in more places as well, but I can't think of any, where, like, I think Shakespeare understands the sort of difficult position in those times women could be in because they had no control, really, over, you know, anything. And so when the men they loved decided to do stupid, bad things. So, like, obviously Ophelia is very torn as well because she is in love with Hamlet. Hamlet's being Hamlet, and then he kills her father.
That's a major red flag.
How does she deal with that? Like, loving Hamlet and him killing her dad. And, like, similarly here, you know, Juliet's like, my husband lives that Tybalt would have slain, and Tybalt's dead that would have slain my husband. All this is comfort. Wherefore weep I then? She is telling herself, like, this is, if Tybalt was going to kill Romeo, it's a good thing he's dead. But, like, she can't help being sad about it. And, like, she has no control over these things, and the men in her life are just fighting away. And, like, how does she reconcile the various things she feels? I don't think Romeo and Juliet overall is a super internal play.
Yeah.
There's some Shakespeare plays that are like very, like obviously internally interesting. Romeo and Juliet's not one of them, but I do think that like you get interesting internal bits with Juliet.
Well, I also think it's probably the most human moment in the play, if only because I think we've all been in a place where somebody we love has done something terrible. Not necessarily a romantic partner, but just somebody that you love.
Mm-hmm.
We see Juliet trying to deal with that. And then also, I mean, this is perhaps more speculation on my end than supported by the text. You are married to this person that you've just met. And this person has just killed your cousin. And you are in this place where you can sort of recognize the error of your ways, or you can just try to plunge ahead and stick with the person that you've got. Because the alternative is that not only do you lose your cousin, but in a sense, you lose your husband as well.
Yeah.
Better to have one than neither. And, you know, that could be the flawed logic working here, because love is stupid. And when I say love is stupid, I don't mean it. Love is also beautiful, but love at its core is very, very stupid, because when you really think about it, there's nothing dumber than the idea of you going to one person, and I know there's the polyamory crowd out there. This is not about you. Get out of here. This is not for you. But the idea of going to one single person of 8 billion people and saying, yes, this is the person I will spend the rest of my life with. That is drastically reckless. But yeah, I mean, Juliet is now in this unenviable situation where she has to work through the cognitive dissonance that her husband has killed a member of her family, and there's no real plan in place for what to do next. Like, they've gotten married, now what? So that's like where you get the graduate moment where they get on the back of the bus and suddenly realize, oh no, there's this like momentum that they force themselves into, and they have to, where Romeo just follows through because that's like his MO basically, is just to be a lovesick loser.
Yeah.
Juliet actually, especially at that time, being married was a big deal. It's not like she could have gotten divorced and moved on. She was stuck with this guy. Maybe she could have gotten, I don't know, marriage law in the 16th century.
Well, at the point where he's killed Tybalt, they still haven't had sex. So she can have the marriage annulled by the Catholic Church in Italy. If you can prove, you haven't had sex, it's not a real marriage yet, you can get it. If she went to the church and was like, hey, as the friar will tell you, I married this guy like 3 hours ago, and we were gonna, consummate it tonight, but then he killed my cousin, so I'd like that annulled. She could probably have it happen.
Yeah. Speaking of the friar, what is he doing? What is he doing here? At first, it seems like he goes through with the marriage because he has a comment about, Romeo shows up and is talking about how in love he is, and the friar actually thinks that he's had a carnal relations with Rosalind. Is he just marrying them off so that they don't commit the moral sin of having sex before marriage? It's weird because in the process, the friar straight up lies about Juliet being dead and in heaven. He actively partakes in this scheme to shepherd these two lovers away from their families, which at the very best seems like he's kind of being an accomplice to kidnapping or something. I don't know. Point being that he tries to cast himself as this like, I couldn't do anything about it. Juliet threatened to kill herself. Romeo threatened to kill himself. What was I supposed to do? And tried to like wash his hands clean in that moment. And it's like, you f***er. This is really all your fault. You could have put a stop to this, but you just didn't because you're stupid.
Yeah. He should have been the responsible adult. He's the authority figure that they involve who's like not the nurse. And, therefore more to be trusted. And he absolutely fails, and he comes up with really bad schemes. He doesn't involve. When Juliet comes to him and is like, what the hell should I do? He should be like, okay, we're going to go back to your parents and tell them you're already married. And if they kick you out, you can go to Mantua.
Yeah.
That's an easy solution.
Yeah.
But no.
No, he just wanted Juliet to go to the nunnery for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, like maybe that was always his plan, is that like, you know, when maybe he knew about the plague and always knew that letter would be delayed, but he sent it just so that, you know, for appearance's sake. And then his plan was always to secretly stick Juliet in a nunnery.
This feels like the whole like theory that Jar Jar Binks was like the true Sith Lord of Star Wars.
But Misa doing nothing.
Or my favorite prequels theory, that Padme knew Anakin was going to go dark side and was trying to mitigate the damage. She couldn't have known she was going to die in childbirth.
Oh, God. It just goes to show, never trust a priest, apparently.
No.
Between this and Fleabag, the priests just are not...
Wait, no, we like Fleabag.
We like hot priest, but he's a bit irresponsible as a priest, I would say.
I mean, we don't need to get into debating about Fleabag hot priest. Like, that's not something we need to do. I would say the situation is a little different, because hot priest is kind of like irresponsible with himself and his own life, versus the friar being irresponsible with two teenagers' lives. So,
well,
there.
The priest is quite hot. It's so hot.
The friar's just trying to live vicariously. There's a lot of that feeling between the friar and the nurse in particular, where they're really pushing this hard. It makes sense in the friar's case, because he's not allowed to have sex. Then there's the nurse, who we are told is ugly. So why wouldn't she like the idea of these two hot teenagers banging as well?
Well, there is something very much about how she like goes on about how hot Romeo is, and then goes on about how hot Paris is, and it's like, you could just do them both, maybe.
Yeah. Well, they kind of do have a threesome at the end there in the tomb. Like, they're all dead.
Tybalt's also in there.
Ooh.
Like, there's a lot of dead bodies.
It's
in
a
that
whole
too.
swingers event going down.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of Tybalt, wait, I want to very quick present my minuscule evidence that Tybalt is gay. Well, he's certainly aligned with Juliet in relation to Romeo. So there's that whole thing about how he can recognize Romeo by his voice, which is suspect. Later on, Juliet says, my ears have not yet drunk 100 words of thy tongue's uttering, yet I know the sound. So she recognizes Romeo by his voice during the balcony scene. So, like, that's something that they both do. And then, during the fight, so Tybalt calls Romeo a villain, blah, blah, blah. Romeo's like, no, I love you, bro. But then, later on, after Mercutio's dead, Romeo is like, now, Tybalt, take the villain back again that late thou gavest to me. Which was very reminiscent, at least for me, of the whole thing where, like, in their first discussion, Romeo and Juliet have this whole thing where, like, he's, a sinner coming to her, like, little saints thing. They kiss, and she's like, now I have your sin. And he's like, oh, give my sin back to me by, like, kissing. This idea of, like, giving a thing back and forth or taking a thing, I was like, that's very reminiscent. Anyhow, this is my minuscule evidence that, like, Tybalt and Juliet should be seen parallels in their relationship with Romeo. It's absolutely nothing, but I did think it's funny that I could find it was there.
Well, also, I mean, if we're going to do reckless speculation here, so in the fight between Mercutio and Tybalt, I think Romeo grabs Tybalt. He's trying to grab his, like, arm.
Yeah.
Tybalt reaches under Romeo's arm to stab Mercutio.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my headcanon, it's just that Tybalt was so excited to be touched by Romeo, he was going in to embrace him, but in the process of that, he just accidentally stabbed a guy.
It is funny that, given the opportunity, he doesn't just stab Romeo.
Tybalt.
Maybe he like wanted to have a little fight. A little fight just for him. He didn't actually want to kill Romeo. He just, little fight, a little fighting foreplay, Just in case anyone who's actually in high school is listening, you like stumbled upon this podcast because you're like, I'm reading Romeo and Juliet. I need to come up with paper ideas or whatever. Please, this is not actual literary analysis right here.
I mean...
Take the stuff I said about Juliet and light. That was interesting. Juliet and identity. Talk about that.
Yeah, or my taboo thing. That's interesting. Although
Yes.
It would be an honor if a high school student cited us. That's how you know that we've made it, Morgan.
Those high schoolers use us as a cheating resource. Not cheating, sorry, an inspiration. Honestly,
Indeed.
SparkNotes is great. Like, SparkNotes is doing the Lord's work out there, so...
Oh no, I have to give praise for the whole No Fear Shakespeare quote unquote translation that they've done. It is a very helpful resource.
I actually used it today because I needed to check the rosemary symbolism thing. And I was like, where can I find this? And I was like, SparkNotes will tell me. And sure enough, they had glossed what the whole rosemary thing went. And I was like, thank you so much. Very helpful, not only in translation, but giving you that contextual information that can be really helpful, considering that like some of the, societal norms or ideas or whatever, we wouldn't know. It's not going to translate.
Yes. Like the whole intro scene, which we haven't really talked about beyond my early praise for it.
Oh, it's just fun.
There's like this back and forth where it's the Montague servants, I think, who are talking. And they have this whole thing about how like they're going to kill all the Capulets and have sex with their women. And then they run across some Capulet servants or somebody. And they're like, uh-oh, what should we do? Is the law on our side? Well, I'm going to bite my thumb at them. And it's like, I don't know what that is, but SparkNotes explains.
It's an insult.
That's like, it's like flipping them off. Mm-hmm. And there's this great exchange where...
Oh.
What?
Let's read it. Let's do it back and forth.
Okay. Who's doing what?
Let's see. So Samson and Gregory are on the same side. So I feel like one of us should play Samson and Gregory and the other person should be Abram.
Okay. I can be Abram, I guess, because I'm really curious to hear you do two different voices.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
I do bite my thumb, sir.
Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
Is it the side of the law if I say I? No. No, sir. I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir.
Do you quarrel, sir?
No, that was also me.
That's also you.
Anyhow. It's a fun scene.
It's a fun play.
It's very fun.
Where it doesn't work is when it tries to be tragic, I think. That's when it falls flat for me. I can't take this romance seriously enough to really care about the tragic elements of this story.
Yeah, I agree with you in a certain way, but I think that what works is not so much the romance. Because of their decisions, have put themselves in such a circumstance that, like, it would be very hard for them to get out of it. I mean, obviously, we came up with multiple solutions that would have worked, but, like, they can't see a way out of it. And I think that the tragedy comes from them desperately kind of trying to and failing. Not so much the, like, romance itself, which is why I think that I agree with you. The part that works least for me is Romeo in Juliet's tomb looking at her supposedly dead body and his monologue there. It's a nice enough monologue. But, like, from a, like, tragic perspective, I'm supposed to be like, oh my god, he thinks she's dead, and now he's gonna kill himself.
Yeah.
But, like, I'm not that touched by it, you know? I don't find "Oh, my love, my life, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath no power yet upon thy beauty." Wow, like, he still thinks she's hot when she's dead. You know what I mean? Like, when it's, like, really trying to play up the romance, I agree. It's difficult to take that seriously. But, like, I mean, I'm going to keep going back to that scene of Juliet struggling with the whole Tybalt-Romeo thing. She has made choices that have put her in this situation, and now she doesn't know what to do with them, and she doesn't know how to get out. And then right after that, she's, like, told she's going to marry Paris? Like, that's the tragedy, is that they're very trapped. And that's sad.
I suppose the lesson in all of this is that if you, listener, your romantic partner kills your cousin, run away.
Get out! And also, don't try and get married at 13 or after you've only exchanged, 5 sentences with a person or any of that. I mean, maybe there actually is a story here that we're not seeing because, Capulet is so horrible to her after she says she won't marry Paris. Maybe she's in a really bad home situation, and part of her eagerness to find love is her just looking for anything to get her out of that. Again, this is not substantiated other than that scene.
Yeah.
This is just me desperately trying to find excuses for Juliet, who admittedly is just 13 and making stupid choices. But just make better choices at 13, people. No, it's hard out there, but...
Not to close with another Flight of the Conchords reference, but a kiss is not a contract, but it's very nice. So you don't have to marry the first person you ever kiss.
No.
There will be many people out there for you.
Especially not if he kisses by the book.
Yes.
Just saying.
Just say no to books. That's the You listen to your kids, don't read any more books.
Anywho, thank you for listening to our Valentine's Day episode. If nothing else, Romeo. Or don't Romeo.
And in any case, we hope this podcast has filled a void for you, so to speak. Okay.
We'll see you next time. Rate, comment, and subscribe.
Indeed. We gotta figure out books. So seriously, let us know what you want us to read. And happy Valentine's Day.
Happy V-Day.
Hasta la vista.
Bye-bye.
Take an expedition for the south, no. A kiss is not a contract, but it's very nice. It's very, very nice. Just because we've been playing tonsil hockey doesn't mean you get to score the goal that's in my jockey.